The gleaming space station orbited Earth like a giant silver ring, its solar panels catching the sun's rays. Inside, a peculiar scene unfolded as a tiny figure walked through the arrival chamber, her footsteps light against the metal floor. Lyra stood only 4 feet tall, her silvery skin reflecting the station's bright lights, while small bioluminescent spots across her body pulsed with a gentle blue glow. She clutched her data tablet close to her chest, trying to appear professional despite feeling overwhelmed by the sheer size of everything around her. The Lumini researcher had spent months preparing for this cultural exchange mission, but nothing could have prepared her for how massive human structures were. "Welcome to International Space Station Alpha," the automated system announced as she passed through the final security checkpoint. "Please proceed to Chamber 14 for orientation." Lyra's large, almond-shaped eyes blinked rapidly as she adjusted to the station's gravity. On her homeworld, everything was perfectly scaled for her kind. Here, even the doorways seemed unnecessarily tall. She had to constantly remind herself that humans were, on average, nearly twice her height. The orientation chamber turned out to be another oversized room, filled with what looked like giants to her. Humans of various colors and sizes sat around a circular table, all of them turning to look at her as she entered. Lyra felt her spots pulse faster, a sign of nervousness in her species. "Ah, you must be our Lumini delegate." A tall human male stood up, and Lyra had to crane her neck to look at his face. "I'm Tom Baker, head of Cinecultural Studies. I'll be your research partner during your stay." Lyra performed the traditional Lumini greeting, her spots creating a wave of light across her body. "Greetings, Research Lead Baker. I am designated Observer Lyra. I look forward to our scientific collaboration." Tom smiled, and Lyra noted this facial movement in her tablet. Humans seemed to do this frequently, though she couldn't understand why they would voluntarily contort their face muscles. "Please, just call me Tom," he said, pulling out a chair for her. Someone had thoughtfully added a booster seat to allow her to reach the table comfortably. "We're pretty informal here." As Lyra settled into her seat, she began recording observations in her tablet. The humans around her were displaying various behaviors that seemed inefficient. They were making small sounds called laughter. Some were consuming liquid stimulants they called coffee, and 2 of them appeared to be unnecessarily touching their hands together under the table. The orientation proceeded with standard protocols, safety briefings, scheduled discussions, and project outlines. Lyra paid careful attention, but she couldn't help noticing how the humans kept engaging in non-essential communication. They made comments about their personal lives, shared stories about their families, and asked each other about activities called weekends. "Lyra," Tom said after the meeting, "let me show you to your quarters. We've modified them to match Lumini environmental preferences." As they walked through the station's corridors, Lyra observed that Tom, despite his intimidating height, moved with careful precision and maintained a respectful distance. She noted this as a positive attribute for their future work together. Her quarters turned out to be a pleasant surprise. The ceiling had been lowered, the furniture was properly scaled, and the lighting was adjusted to match her homeworld's spectrum. A small observation window provided a stunning view of Earth below. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" Tom asked, ducking slightly to fit through the modified doorway. "The adaptations are adequate," Lyra responded, her spots glowing with approval. "I can begin my research effectively from here." "Excellent," Tom smiled again. "Get some rest, and we'll start proper tomorrow. The cafeteria is just down the hall if you need nutrition." "Oh, and Lyra, welcome to humanity's little corner of space." After Tom left, Lyra spent several minutes updating her research notes. The humans seemed efficient enough in their work, even if their behaviors were puzzlingly complex. She was confident she could maintain professional distance while conducting her studies. Little did she know that her carefully planned research project was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about emotions, connections, and the strange creatures called humans. The space station's observation deck became Lyra's favorite spot for studying human behavior. She sat in her specially designed chair, data tablet ready, as she watched the daily interactions of the crew. After 2 weeks on the station, her notes had grown extensive, but the behavior she observed only became more confusing. Today, she watched with growing bewilderment as 2 humans stood very close together near the large viewport window. They weren't exchanging any meaningful information, yet they remained there, fingers intertwined, staring at Earth below. Lyra's spots flickered with confusion as she recorded this interaction. Specimen A and B engaging in prolonged physical contact. No apparent scientific or survival benefit. Third occurrence this week, she muttered while typing. Her large eyes narrowed as the 2 humans suddenly pressed their faces together. Alert. Possible contamination event in progress. They're just kissing. Tom's voice came from behind her, making her spots flash bright blue in surprise. It's perfectly normal. Lyra turned to her research partner, her expression showing what humans might interpret as horror. You mean this behavior is intentional? They're deliberately exchanging bacterial cultures. Tom couldn't help but laugh, which only confused Lyra more. She had noticed humans often made this sound when something wasn't actually funny. It's a way to show affection, he explained, sitting down in the chair next to her. Humans do it all the time when they're dating. Dating. Lyra repeated the word carefully, adding it to her notes. This is the 3rd time I've heard this term. Is it some form of data exchange? Not exactly. Tom rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It's more like a courtship ritual. People spend time together to see if they're compatible for a potential long-term relationship. Lyra's spots began pulsing rapidly, a sign of distress among her people. You mean humans deliberately seek emotional attachments without any reproductive necessity? Her voice rose slightly, drawing curious glances from nearby crew members. Well, yes, Tom replied. Don't Lumini form any kinds of emotional bonds? We have efficient spore-based reproduction cycles, Lyra stated matter-of-factly. Emotional attachment would be highly illogical and potentially dangerous to our society's stability. As if to challenge her worldview, another couple walked past, holding hands and laughing. Lyra quickly added more notes to her tablet, Subject C displaying irregular vocal patterns while maintaining unnecessary physical contact with Subject D, possible sign of mental disturbance. Tom watched her with amusement as she documented everything with scientific precision. You know, not everything humans do has to have a logical purpose. Sometimes we do things just because they feel good. Feel good. Lyra's spots dimmed to a confused purple. She had heard this phrase before, but struggled to understand its relevance to survival or scientific progress. Her confusion deepened when she noticed 2 more crew members in the cafeteria sharing something called ice cream from the same container. They were using the same eating utensil, taking turns, and appearing to enjoy this clearly inefficient method of nutrient consumption. Tom. She turned to her research partner. I must express concern about the station's protocols. There seems to be a widespread epidemic of irrational behavior among the crew. It's not irrational to us, Tom explained patiently. Humans are social creatures. We form bonds, share experiences, and yes, sometimes we do things just because they make us happy. Lyra spent the rest of the day observing more of these peculiar interactions. She watched crew members hugging after completing successful experiments, sharing food during break times, and even engaging in something called dancing during the evening recreation period. In her private quarters that night, Lyra reviewed her notes with growing concern. Her spots glowed a worried yellow as she compiled her observations. Human social behaviors appear to prioritize emotional satisfaction over logical efficiency. They voluntarily engage in activities that serve no practical purpose. Most concerning of all, they seem to actively seek these illogical connections with each other. Further research needed to understand if this behavior poses any risk to interspecies relations. She had no idea that her clinical observations would soon take a very personal turn. The station's digital library became Lyra's sanctuary late at night when most humans were sleeping. She sat in her modified chair, surrounded by holographic screens displaying various human entertainment media. What had started as casual research into human culture had turned into a horrifying revelation. "Computer, please define butterflies and stomach," Lyra requested, her spots pulsing with confusion as she read a human romance novel. Metaphorical expression, a fluttering sensation in one's stomach caused by nervousness or romantic attraction. The computer responded neutrally. Lyra's spots flickered rapidly in distress. Humans actually welcome internal organ disturbance as a sign of attraction. She quickly added this disturbing fact to her growing list of concerns about human mating practices. The holographic screens surrounding her displayed scenes from various human romance movies. In one, a human female waited in the rain for her beloved. In another, someone traveled across an entire continent just to tell someone else they loved them. Lyra watched in mounting horror as humans repeatedly put themselves through physical and emotional distress for something called love. "Computer, display historical documents about human pair bonding," she commanded, hoping to find some logical explanation for this behavior in their past. Instead, what she found only increased her concern. Poems about heartache, songs about longing, stories about people willing to die for love. Thousands of years of humans deliberately pursuing emotional turbulence. Her spots had turned a pale gray, indicating deep distress. "They write entire musical compositions about having their cardiac organs broken," she muttered, frantically typing notes. "And yet they continue to seek these connections. This is madness." A particularly dramatic scene from a movie made her jump in her chair. The human male was declaring his undying love while standing on some kind of elevated platform, risking both social embarrassment and physical injury. "Computer, what percentage of human creative works involve romantic themes?" "Approximately 60% of all human creative works contain romantic elements or themes," the computer replied. Lyra's spots nearly went dark with shock. "More than half. They're obsessed." She began pacing around the library, her small feet making soft pattering sounds on the metal floor. This explained so much about their behavior on the station. The constant touching, the shared meals, the prolonged eye contact. She pulled up more data about human physiology during romantic attraction. The increased heart rate, the release of various chemicals in the brain, the physical symptoms of attraction. It all seemed like a form of pleasant torture that humans willingly subjected themselves to. "Computer, show me human wedding ceremonies." The screens filled with images of elaborate celebrations, people crying with joy, families coming together. Lyra watched in fascination and horror as humans publicly declared their intention to remain emotionally compromised for their entire lives. They even make legally binding contracts to maintain their emotional instability, she exclaimed, her voice rising with concern. "This is beyond illogical. It's potentially dangerous." As she delved deeper into her research, she found something even more alarming. Humans didn't just accept these emotional states, they celebrated them. They built entire industries around finding love, maintaining love, and recovering from lost love. Lyra began compiling an emergency report for her superiors back home. Her small fingers flew over the tablet as she wrote, "URGNT. Human emotional practices pose significant risk to interspecies relations. Their concept of romance appears to be highly contagious, spreading through cultural exchange and media exposure. They have developed sophisticated methods of transmitting these ideas through various art forms. Most concerning discovery. They consider this emotional turbulence to be not just normal, but desirable." She paused in her writing, her spots pulsing with worried purple light. Something was bothering her about Tom's smile earlier that day, and the way her own spots had brightened when he praised her research methods. Surely that was just professional satisfaction, wasn't it? The thought made her even more anxious. She needed to finish this report quickly before these human ideas could spread any further. Little did she know, it might already be too late. For the first time in her carefully structured life, Lyra found herself unable to focus on her research. She sat in the station's laboratory, pretending to analyze data while actually watching Tom work at his desk across the room. Her spots kept brightening whenever he looked her way, and she couldn't seem to control it. "Are you feeling well?" Tom asked, noticing her unusual behavior. "Your bioluminescence seems more active than usual." Lyra's spots flashed bright blue with embarrassment. "I am functioning within normal parameters," she replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. But she knew she was lying. Nothing about her recent reactions felt normal. It had started 3 days ago. Tom had helped her reach a high shelf, and his hand had briefly touched her shoulder. Since then, her body had been betraying her with the most alarming symptoms. Her spots would glow without her permission. Her heart rate would increase for no logical reason. And worst of all, she found herself wanting to spend more time around him. "Perhaps I should run a diagnostic," she muttered to herself, checking her vital signs for the 5th time that day. Everything appeared normal, except for the strange fluttering sensation in her midsection whenever Tom spoke to her. During their lunch break, she noticed herself doing something completely irrational. She was counting the different colors in Tom's eyes. They reminded her of the nebulae visible from her homeworld, and she caught herself wondering if other humans had such interesting eye patterns. "No, no, no," she whispered in horror, her spots pulsing with panic. "This can't be happening." She rushed to her quarters and pulled up her research notes about human romance. The symptoms were undeniable. Increased heart rate in presence of specific individual. Involuntary physiological responses. Intrusive thoughts about physical characteristics. Desire for prolonged proximity. "I've been infected," she realized, her spots turning pale with fear. "I'm experiencing what humans call a crush." The revelation sent her into a spiral of anxiety. She began pacing her small quarters, her steps quick and agitated. How had this happened? She was a trained researcher, a logical being. She had specifically documented the dangers of human emotional contagion, and yet here she was, experiencing the very phenomenon she had warned about. When Tom knocked on her door later that day, she nearly jumped out of her skin. "Lyra, we're scheduled to review the cultural exchange data," he called through the door. "One moment," she squeaked, her voice higher than usual. She took several deep breaths, trying to control her rebellious spots. Maintain professional distance, she reminded herself firmly. But when she opened the door and saw Tom's concerned expression, her spots betrayed her again, glowing with an intensity that lit up the entire corridor. "Wow," Tom said, staring at the display. "That's beautiful." Lyra wanted to dissolve into a puddle of mortification. Beautiful? No, this was horrifying. She was exhibiting classic symptoms of human romantic attraction, and worse still, she was starting to understand why humans wrote all those songs about it. "The data review," she said stiffly, trying to maintain her composure. "We should focus on the data review." But focusing proved impossible. She found herself noticing things she shouldn't. The way Tom's hands moved when he explained something, how his voice had different tones depending on what he was talking about. The gentle way he always made sure to accommodate her smaller size. By the end of the day, Lyra had to face the terrible truth. She, a logical Lumini researcher, had developed emotional responses that went against everything her species believed in. She was experiencing the very thing she had been studying with such scientific detachment. In her personal log that night, she made a shaking entry. Day 47 on human station. "I appear to have been compromised by human emotional patterns. Most alarming symptom. I no longer find it alarming. Further research needed to determine if condition is reversible. Current status. Help." Her spots continued to pulse with a soft, warm glow long into the night, matching the rhythm of her confused but oddly happy heart. Lyra's fingers trembled as she composed her emergency transmission to the Lumini High Council. The small communication room felt even more cramped than usual as she huddled over her terminal, her spots flickering with nervous energy. "Urgent alert to High Council," she began typing. Subject: immediate quarantine request for Earth and all human installations. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. Evidence suggests humans possess dangerous emotional capabilities that can affect other species. This researcher has personally confirmed the contagious nature of their romantic behaviors. Recommend immediate cessation of all cultural exchange programs. The words poured out of her as she detailed her symptoms: the unauthorized spot glowing, the irregular heart patterns, the constant thoughts about a certain human. She attached her research notes about human romance, highlighting particularly alarming passages about love at first sight and soulmates. Most critically, she wrote, her spots pulsing with distress. Humans appear to be natural emotional transmitters. They can induce these states in others without conscious effort. Their very presence poses a risk to our logical society. Just as she was about to send the transmission, a soft knock at the door made her jump. Her spots flashed bright white with surprise. "Lyra, are you in there?" Tom's voice came through the door. "You missed our morning research session." "One moment," she called out, quickly saving her draft. But in her haste, she accidentally displayed it on the main screen instead of closing it. The door slid open, and Tom stepped in, ducking slightly under the lower doorframe. His eyes immediately went to the large display where her emergency message was clearly visible. "Emotional quarantine," he read aloud, his voice filled with confusion. "Lyra, what is this?" Her spots began rapidly cycling through colors, a sign of extreme distress in Lumini. This is not," she stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence for the first time in her life. Tom's eyes scanned the message, his expression changing from confusion to understanding. "You're experiencing feelings for someone," he said softly, "and it's scaring you." "Feelings are dangerous," Lyra burst out, her usual composure shattering. "They're unpredictable, illogical, and completely destroy rational thought processes. Look what's happening to me. I can't focus on my work, my spots won't obey my commands, and I keep having these thoughts." "What kind of thoughts?" Tom asked gently, kneeling down to be at her eye level. "I want to know what you're thinking when you look at the stars. I wonder if your hair is as soft as it looks. I catch myself making excuses to be in the same room as you." Her spots were practically strobing now. "This isn't normal. This isn't me." Tom's face softened with understanding. "So I'm the one who's allegedly emotionally compromised you." Lyra's spots turned a deep blue, the Lumini equivalent of a blush. That information wasn't meant to be shared. And your solution is to quarantine all of humanity. It seems the most logical course of action," she replied weakly, knowing how ridiculous it sounded when said aloud. "Lyra," Tom said carefully, "feelings aren't a disease. They're part of life for many species, even species that think they've evolved past them." She stared at him, her spots slowly settling into a confused purple glow. "What do you mean?" But before Tom could answer, an incoming transmission alert flashed on her screen. The High Council was responding to her partial draft. Lyra's spots went completely dark with dread. In her emotional turmoil, she had accidentally sent the first part of her message. Now she had started something she couldn't stop. "Oh no," she whispered, watching the incoming message indicator blink ominously. "What have I done?" Tom placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and to her horror, her spots immediately brightened at his touch. "Whatever it is," he said, "we'll figure it out together." And the most terrifying part, a small part of her was happy, he said. "We." The High Council's response glowed on the screen before them, its formal language doing little to mask their concern. Lyra read it aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "Researcher Lyra, your report is most disturbing. A quarantine evaluation team will arrive within 3 standard cycles. Maintain minimal contact with human subjects until then." Tom stood quietly beside her, his presence both comforting and terrifying. 3 cycles means 3 days, he said finally. "That doesn't give us much time." "Us?" Lyra's spots pulsed questioningly. "You're not upset about my attempted quarantine recommendation?" Instead of answering directly, Tom walked to the room's small viewport. Earth hung below them, a blue marble wrapped in swirling white clouds. Did you know that Lumini weren't always purely logical beings? Lyra's spots flickered with surprise. What do you mean? I've been doing my own research, Tom explained. Your ancient historical records, the ones from before the Great Rationalization, they tell a different story. Your people once had rich emotional lives. Art, music, even pair bonding ceremonies. That's impossible, Lyra protested, but even as she spoke, something deep inside her resonated with his words. We evolved beyond such primitive behaviors. Tom pulled up some files on his tablet and showed them to her. Ancient Lumini cave paintings depicted pairs of her species with their spots glowing in synchronized patterns. There were carved sculptures showing intertwined figures, their spots carefully etched to show emotional states. Your species didn't evolve past emotions, Tom said gently. They chose to suppress them. There's a difference. Lyra stared at the images, her scientific mind processing this new information. But why would they hide this from us? Sometimes, Tom explained, when people are hurt or scared, they think the solution is to stop feeling altogether. But feelings aren't the enemy, Lyra. They're just another way of understanding the world. Her spots began to pulse in a slow, thoughtful pattern. But they're so chaotic, unpredictable. Like quantum mechanics, Tom suggested with a smile. Some of the most important forces in the universe don't follow neat, predictable patterns. That doesn't make them less valuable. Lyra found herself moving closer to him, her natural researcher's curiosity awakening. You're suggesting that emotions serve a purpose beyond simple chemical responses. They help us connect, Tom said. They help us understand each other in ways pure logic can't. When your spots glow brighter around me, that's not a malfunction. It's communication on a level deeper than words. As if to prove his point, her spots brightened at his words. But this time, she didn't try to suppress it. The quarantine team, she said suddenly, remembering their deadline. They'll want to end all human Lumini contact. Then we have 3 days to prove that emotional connections aren't a threat, Tom replied. That they're a strength, not a weakness. Lyra looked at the ancient artwork again, seeing her ancestors in a new light. They hadn't been primitive. They had been whole. Something shifted in her understanding, like a complex equation finally balancing. I need to write a new report, she said firmly. Not about quarantine, but about rediscovery. About how humans helped a Lumini researcher find something her people had lost. Tom's smile made her spots glow even brighter, but this time she didn't feel horror. Instead, she felt something new. Hope. Will you help me? She asked, looking up at him. This may be the most important research of my career. Of course, he replied. But first, I think you need to decide something for yourself. What's that? Whether you're really horrified by human romance, he said softly, or if you're just scared of feeling something you don't fully understand. Lyra's spots pulsed with a new pattern, one that hadn't been seen among her people for thousands of years. It was the pattern shown in those ancient cave paintings, the one that meant awakening. They had 3 days to change centuries of Lumini thinking, but for the first time since she'd noticed her spots glowing around Tom, Lyra felt ready to face the challenge. 3 months after the quarantine team's visit to the space station, Lyra stood before the Lumini High Council, her spots glowing with quiet confidence. The grand chamber, with its soaring crystal arches, held the largest gathering of Lumini officials in recent memory. Distinguished council members, she began, her voice clear and steady. I stand before you today to present my completed research on human emotional practices and their implications for our society. The council members' spots pulsed with attention as she activated her presentation. Images of Earth, the space station, and various human interactions filled the air around them. 3 months ago, I sent an alarming message about human emotional contagion, she continued. I was wrong. What I interpreted as a threat was actually an opportunity, a chance to reclaim something our species had lost. She showed them the ancient Lumini artifacts Tom had helped her discover, along with her new findings. Our ancestors understood something we've forgotten. Emotions aren't opposed to logic. They complement it. They provide context, motivation, and deeper understanding. The chamber filled with flickering spots as council members responded to her words. Some pulsed with skepticism, others with curiosity. Furthermore, Lyra continued, I've discovered that our bioluminescence isn't just for basic communication. It's an emotional language far more sophisticated than we realized. Watch. She played a recording of her spot's patterns when she worked with Tom, compared to the ancient patterns from their historical records. They matched perfectly. We didn't evolve past emotions, she explained. We merely buried them. But they're still part of who we are. An elder council member's spots flashed with concern. And the human? The one who assisted your research? Lyra's spots brightened slightly at the mention of Tom. He helped me understand that feeling isn't weakness. It's another form of strength. She shared her findings about improved problem-solving, enhanced creativity, and stronger social bonds among humans who embraced both logic and emotion. The data was undeniable, even to the most skeptical council members. I propose a new direction for our people, Lyra announced. Not a return to purely emotional behavior, but a balanced approach. We can maintain our logical foundations while exploring the benefits of emotional intelligence. The chamber erupted in a dazzling display of spot communications as council members debated. Finally, the high speaker's spots pulsed for attention. Your research is compelling, Researcher Lyra, they said. We will need time to process these implications. But for now, we approve continued cultural exchange with humans and authorize further study of emotional integration. Later that evening, Lyra sent a holographic message to Tom, her spots creating beautiful patterns of joy as she shared the news. They approved everything, she told him, her small form glowing with excitement. The exchange program will expand, and they're establishing a new research division for emotional studies. Tom's hologram smiled warmly. I knew you could do it. You've changed your people's history. We've changed it, she corrected him, her spots forming the ancient pattern for affection. I couldn't have done this alone. So, does this mean you're no longer horrified by human romance? He teased. Lyra's spots rippled with laughter, a display she'd once thought impossible. I'm still learning, she admitted, but I'm not scared anymore. Actually, I'm writing a paper about it. The logical benefits of emotional connections. The Lumini perspective. Sounds fascinating, Tom said, though I like your original title better. They shared a moment of comfortable silence, their respective forms of expression. His smile, her glowing spots, saying more than words could. I should prepare for tomorrow's presentations, Lyra finally said. The council wants me to help design the new emotional integration curriculum. Go change the world, Tom replied. I'll be here when you're done. As she ended the transmission, Lyra looked out at the stars visible from her home world. Her spots glowed with a pattern that combined both ancient emotional expression and modern precision, a perfect reflection of what she hoped her people would become. She wasn't that same horrified researcher who first encountered human romance. She was something new, a bridge between two ways of being, helping her people rediscover that logic and emotion could coexist in beautiful harmony. And she wouldn't have it any other way.